South African Super Rugby Team of the Decade. I've already done one of these for the New Zealand lot. I'll check that up there in case you haven't seen it. But in case you haven't, I will quickly re-mention. It's the official Super Rugby Team of the Decade, found at the Super Rugby website, which I'll hopefully remember to put in the description. And they've solely based it on stats over the last 10 years. I feel like some of the stats are a bit skewed in that they have gone seemingly purely for the totals over the last 10 years. So, for example, players like Dan Carter and Richie McCaw didn't make the New Zealand team because essentially they only played 5 years in the last decade. 2010 to 2019, which was the cutoff, they only played like till 2015. So, yeah. Players whose careers have spanned pretty much the whole 10 years in Super Rugby tended to fare a bit better than those who didn't. Anyway, we'll go with the South African team. I'll put the guys on the board, and you guys can let me know what you reckon about them as well. Start with the props. They have gone with Stephen Kitsoff at loosehead. Stephen Kitsoff is a fine player, so I don't mind having him there. I would have thought maybe the Beast as well, but Kitsoff is probably the other obvious pick. Played for the Stormers, obviously. Now, the reasoning they've picked him is interesting. So, won the most line-out throws, 35, of any prop in Super Rugby in the last decade. I'm not sure when I pick my props I would be picking on line-out throws, but again, this is just me sitting on the other side of the fence. Usually it's me picking a team and people picking my team apart. This time it's me picking their team apart, which is a bit of an interesting one. While one of South African props, only one South African prop made more clean breaks than Kitsoff with 13. Jeez, made a meal of that. But yeah, he's a pretty dynamic ball carrier. Stephen Kitsoff, I mean, his scrummaging, I would have said, is pretty good as well. He is actually a bit of a turnover master as well. So, yeah, pretty good prop all round. I'm not sure how many years he played in Super Rugby, because didn't he take a break overseas? Anyway, the other guy I've gone with is Franz Malherbe. He's again, he is pretty much known for his scrummaging. That's kind of what gets him into the side. He's a guy that doesn't look like a professional athlete in terms of he looks like a guy you would meet at the pub, but I wouldn't mess with him because the guy can scrummage. 597 tackles, won 21 turnovers. 21 turnovers, that's impressive for Franz Malherbe. 230 carries for 363 meters. That's actually better numbers than I would have given him credit for. I pretty much always assume that he makes whatever team he's in based on the fact that he is a good scrummager. I don't have a problem with that because as a prop, that is your primary job. Like Owen Franks is a guy who is not flash at much, but is a very, very good scrummager. So, yeah, but it's impressive to see Franz has got those numbers as well. So a couple of Stormers guys in the propping ranks, in the front rank. I also thought Connie Oosthuizen had a few good years. Had a big long-term injury layoff, so maybe that kind of helped rule him out as well. But, yeah. Next, they have gone hooker. They've gone with Malcolm Marx. So first Lions player here. Reasoning is, scored the second most tries, 30, of any forward in Super Rugby in the last 10 years. He did have a couple of years off the back of that Lions maul where he would just get tries almost every other week. Also won the most turnovers, 80 of any hooker, and had the second most successful line-out throws, 598 of any South African too. Now that's one where I'd like to see the average of his success rate because 598 is a big number, but it's one area of his game that always seemed a little bit fragile, or at least not as perfect as the rest of his game. So I would like to see what his average success rate for his line-out throw was rather than just the total of 598, because I'm not sure it'd be as high as some of the other guys, but who knows? It would be nice to see. other hookers who could have made it, I mean, maybe Bismarck, but I think, again, he's probably suffering from the fact that he's only about half of that decade. I would have thought Adrian Strauss as well. Probably played more years than Malcolm Marx. Don't know. But, yeah, they've gone with Marx. Can't complain about him in recent years, that's for sure. Locks. Another Lions man. They've gone with Franco Mostert. And he always had a big engine on him. So, again, I'm not surprised that he racked up some big numbers. Most meters with 1,055 of any South African lock in Super Rugby in the last decade. 540 carries. That only averages out to like, 2 meters a carry, which is a bit on the low side. But locks generally don't have great meters per carry. Stole 33 lineouts, made the most tackles, 697 of any South African player. I'm kind of not surprised about that, because anytime I've watched Franco Mostert and actually written down all the stats and whatnot, his tackle count is always huge. And at lineout time, he is a top operator. So I think, yeah, fair enough to pick him in there. And the other lock they've gone with kind of flirts between lock and loose forwards. They have gone with Peter Steph du Toit as the other lock. So they say beat the most defenders, 69 of any South African lock in Super Rugby. Lock, they've put specifically in the last 10 years. Also 459 carries, 26 turnovers and 42 offloads. I'm surprised they haven't included any of his tackle stats, because that, again, is what he does with aplomb. He tackles and tackles and tackles and tackles into the ground. So I'm kind of surprised not to see any kind of tackle-related stat there for Peter Steph. Did I have a think about any other locks? Ludiaka, I thought probably had some pretty good numbers, again, but I haven't looked. He was the main guy I thought of. Some of the other guys in the last decade, guys like, Victor Matfield, like 2011. He kind of retired, came back for a bit, but, not consistent throughout the last 10 years. I'm sure there are some others, but Snyman only came on the scene kind of late in the last 10 years, so I think you can be happy enough with Mostert and Peter Steph if you're keen to put Peter Steph in the second row. Lucy's. They've put this as number 6, so you can say open side on South Africa. They've gone with Siya Kolisi. They've put for him, only 2 South African forwards have gained more meters than Kolisi in the last decade. He had 2,100 meters from 624 carries. That's a pretty good return, I think, in terms of average meters per carry. He also made the second most clean breaks, 54 of any forward from his country. Yeah, Kolisi he's always been a bit of a jack of all trades in that he can pilfer, he can tackle like a demon, and he can be a very dynamic ball carrier. But I think the dynamic ball carrying has always been the area that he's maybe leaned a bit more towards. He's not a specialist kind of, David Pocock style pilferer. But, man, I'm impressed to see those numbers there. So, yeah, I think maybe Rassie got him to focus a bit on that part of his game as well. I'm not sure. But, yeah, that seems to be one area he is very hard to compete with. Number 8, they've gone with Warren Whiteley. Probably a pretty fair pick. He played most of his career, I feel like, in that last 10 years. Second most offloads of any South African forward in the last 10 years. That's the one that I wouldn't have come up with off the top of my head. Also has the most tackles. Now that one I would have thought is true, because he's another guy who just tackles and tackles all day long, 855. And second most clean breaks, 46 of any number 8 during that period. Man, that's impressive. That is really good. I mean, he played in some pretty good Lion sides, did Whiteley, captained them very well. I think that's an aspect that you can't measure in numbers, is his ability to captain a side. But, yeah, man, very good player. Obviously retired now, but it's a pity he didn't quite get that Super Rugby title. That's one thing I'll say. But, yeah. And the last guy they've got is Jean-Luc Tabria. in the number 7 jersey. Made the most carries, 373, and gained the most meters, and gained 980 meters of any, second most carries and meters gained. Okay, of any South African. Number 7 in Super Rugby in the last decade. Tabria beat the third most defenders, 88, of any number 7 in this time. Yeah, again, he's a pretty offensive ball carrier. He is, unlike some guys who are, very defensively orientated in terms of the number of tackles. That's not really his game. He is a big man, puts his body into action, and sets up other people as well. So, yeah, man, fair call. Not really a specialist turnover agent there, but I guess they mentioned that Peter Steff, Malcolm Marx, and I know Kitsoff as well can get the odd turnover. The guys that came to the top of my head, and again, I haven't looked up the exact years that they played, but Marcel Coetzee, I thought was always a pretty good operator in the loose. I know he has been gone for a few years. Lapis Labaskakni for the Cheetahs for quite a few years was a tackling and turnover machine as well. Yeah, those are the first two that came to my head. Oh, and also Dwayne Vermeulen. I think he clocked up about 6 years. I did look for Dwayne. 6 years all up, so maybe probably not enough to get those totals up to compete for the South African team of the decade. So, there'll be more guys. You guys do let me know in the comments who else they could have had. Number 9 is an interesting one. They've gone with Louis Schrader. They've wrote Stormers, Kings, Sharks. I forgot that he played for so many teams. Played the most minutes, 4,808 of any South African scrum half in the last decade. I'm not sure if played the most minutes necessarily should be one that's that shouldn't be the stat that you lead with, right? That's like the kid who attends the most classes if the teacher doesn't make him the best kid in the class. Just saying. With only one player making more than Schrader's 29 try assists. Okay, 29 try assists. He made 310 carries and beat 62 defenders. Okay, solid numbers. You want your number 9 to be getting try assists because that's one area they should be able to target. So, yep, Schrader. I thought Sarel Pretorius had a few good years in Super Rugby, didn't he? Where he was just kind of a different style, like a very take the ball in hand. What's the Bulls guy? Played for the Springboks and on the wing. Oh, somebody tell me in the comments. He was the Bulls scrum half for a long time. Oh, it's going to bother me because I can picture his face. Anyway, those two guys were both pretty good as well. So maybe better than Schrader, I would have thought. But again, he played the most minutes. Number 10 is probably going to bother a few people. But they've gone with Elton Yankees. And again, I think part of this is the fact that I did check him as well. I think he pretty much started his Super Rugby career 2011. So this 10-year period fits him pretty much like a glove. Scored the second most points, 1,145 of any player in Super Rugby in the last 10 years. Also made the third most try assists with 59 of any player while gaining the most meters, 2,902. And making the most clean breaks, 50 of any South African, number 10. So most run meters, most clean breaks of any South African, 10. Again, he's had a lot more chances to do it in terms of the amount of games that he's played in those 10 years compared to someone like Pollard, maybe like Pat Lambie. One thing I will say about this pick is Elton at Super Rugby level, I think, and I know it's not a universally shared opinion by any means, I think at Super Rugby level he looks really good. I think it's when he steps up to Springboks level that he looks a bit out of his depth and that kind of tars his image. But at Super Rugby level, I honestly think he's a really good player. So I don't mind having him there as the Super Rugby guy for the decade because he has played a lot of games in that decade. Is he a better player than Pollard? No. But, maybe his impact on Super Rugby has been a bit bigger. Don't know. He played in a pretty good Lions team, man. They were pretty good. Midfielders, they have gone with Damien, Lindy, At number 12, this guy's another guy who gets a bit of stick for not passing the ball. Let's see if any passing stats are in his little bio. Beat the second most defenders of any South African back in the last 10 years, 252. 831 carries, 547 tackles, the third most from any back in South Africa. So, yep, he's been a pretty good player over the last 10 years. Played the World Cup. Fair pick, I think that's fine. And the other guy they have gone with is Jesse Creole at 13. It says he is the only centre in the last 4 seasons of Super Rugby to score a try in 4 consecutive games. That's a bit of an obscure stat. He's scored 19 tries in total across the last decade. Only Bjorn Basson, who was definitely a bit of a versatile player in terms of his positioning, scored more for the Bulls in this period. I feel like that's a pretty weak bio compared to a lot of the other guys. It seems like a bit of clutching at straws. Does Jean de Villiers not make this lineup? When did he retire? Was it after 2015? Maybe that's why. I'll have to think about centres because I didn't... Yeah, none of them really immediately come to mind. Oh, Jan Serfontein, right? How many years did he play in Super Rugby? Tough one. Outside backs. Left wing, they have gone with, speaking of versatile, Dylan Lades. I think he's another guy who's like your ultimate Super Rugby player. Like not necessarily fits the mold for Springboks, although I do rate him. At Super Rugby level, I think he's really exciting. Got a great skill set. 602 carries for 3,711 metres, while only 3 South African backs have made more clean breaks than Lades in the last decade. So he's made 93. So yeah, offensively, he's pretty good. Sick offloads, great steps. I mean, I've seen him play 10. I've seen him play 15, 14, 11. The guy plays all over the shop. Very versatile, very attacking-minded player. Exciting, fun guy to watch. Again, maybe a bit small defensively, maybe a bit frail, but still pretty good player to watch. Fullback, they have gone with Andreas Kutsia. Third most carries, 868 meters gained, 5,464. For a fullback, you think maybe you'd be getting a bit more? Because you get a lot of free meters as a fullback, just getting kick returns. And defenders beaten 243 of any fullback in the last 10 years. Okay, those are pretty good numbers. And the most of any South African number 15 in all 3 categories. So that was carries, defenders beaten, and meters gained. So, yep, he's a pretty good player. And guys like Haaland, he's only come on the last kind of few years. How many years has he played? Not that many. Pat Lambiano played a bit at fullback, but he was also playing 10. Who else? I feel like I'm missing somebody, but yeah. Anyway. Andrews Kutsia, at least in the last few years for the Lions, also has been top. And right wing, they have gone with Courtnall Skorsan. I feel like this is a team which definitely leans towards more recent years than the earlier players of the last 10 years. So Courtnall Skorsan scored the second most tries with 35 and made the third most clean breaks with 103 of any South African back in the last decade of Super Rugby. Skorsan made 477 carries for 3,313 metres gained, which seems like a pretty fair return. Skorsan also played in a pretty good Lions team. He also had a bit of an injury layoff, but I think it's been a pretty dynamic and exciting player at the back there for the Lions. So what does that break down? 6 Lions they've put. I'm just going by the little logos that they've put. 6 Lions, 6 Stormers, 2 Sharks, and a Bull. Oh, I did write down a few guys. Cyril Pretorius. Faf de Klerk for the Lions, maybe. Not sure how many. He's probably lifted his game since he went overseas. I mentioned Labuskakny and Oosthuizen, Adrian Strauss, Ludiaka, Hondre Palapat, Lambie, Marcel Kutsuya, Vermeulen, Jan Serfontein, Bismarck. Oh, yeah. Odwa Mdungane and Loazi Mvovo both played, like, they're maybe better numbers towards the earlier end of the last decade, but maybe in with a bit of a shout as well. Don't know. So that's the official South African Super Rugby team of the decade. Which one player do you have as the player of the decade? Do you go with World Player of the Year, Peter Septutoy? Probably 18 months ago, the easily best hooker in World Rugby, Malcolm Marx. Lifted the World Cup, Siya Kolisi. They have gone with Player of the Decade as Elton Yankees. Stats and facts. Tries 13, try assists 59, clean breaks 54, defenders beat 159, offloads 108, carries 857, scored the second most points. They played that same line. So yeah, Elton Yankees is the Player of the Decade for Super Rugby. And it is hard to kind of switch your brain off to everything that happened at international level and just focus on Super Rugby. That's what they've done here. Like I mentioned, I think it's a bit flawed that it seems to be just totals that they've gone by, but I guess you need a measuring stick, so that's the one they've gone with. Do let me know some of the guys who you think also could have been up here, because I'm sure there are a bunch. Those are just the ones that I thought of off the top of my head before getting the video ready. I think, yeah, there's definitely a few Cheetahs guys. There were a couple of years where the Cheetahs were, I know they only made the playoffs once, but they were definitely an exciting team to watch for a few years. Hussein is maybe worth a shout, but yeah. You guys let me know your thoughts. I'll put the link to the team in the description, and yeah, it seems like number 10s are in the popularity stakes are winning the race, because if you looked at the New Zealand video, it was a 10 who got that job as well, but Player of the Decade. I'll see how the Aussie team goes. I still haven't had a look at that, but yeah, cheers to Lance also for letting me know that these were available online, because he's the one who pointed them out. But yeah, cheers guys, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.